Hey guys, this is Post-Production Pi with srlounge.com, and in this tutorial we're going to cover how the SR Lounge Lightroom 4 preset system works. Now this first tutorial is going to be geared towards learning the develop presets, and then we're going to cover brush presets in the next tutorial. So let's talk about it. Starting from the top, we have a nice image loaded up here. This was shot on a 5D Mark II. Let's start with the very top folder, which is 00 My Mixology. Now you'll notice that there's 7 different folders starting with 00, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the My Mixology folder is basically where you're going to store all of your favorite presets for Lightroom. And we're going to come up with tons of different Lightroom recipes, which is what we call mixology. So when you guys see some of these cool Lightroom recipes, you can take those and you can store it into your mixology folder. So you have a nice custom set of mixology recipes that you guys like yourselves. So we leave it blank with the exception of one preset, which is the standard import preset. Now this standard import preset, if I click it, you'll notice that it's going to apply sharpening, add a little bit of contrast, clean up the vignetting on the edges. It's a general import preset that's designed for Canon and Nikon RAW shooters. Now this means if you guys shoot JPEG, then this might be too strong of an effect because JPEG images come out of the camera with processing applied to them. But we're going to show you guys how to customize the standard import preset for those of you that don't shoot RAW or for those of you that shoot on a non-Canon or non-Nikon camera. But just know that this is the preset that you guys want to select whenever you're importing images into Lightroom. And that way, images that have a semi-correct white balance and exposure are actually going to come in looking fabulous just with this standard import preset applied. Now for those of you that use Photoshop, you know that we adjust and we modify our images in layers and we stack layers on top of each other as we go through to perfect our images. Now Lightroom doesn't have layers, so what we did was when we designed this preset system, we designed it with a kind of layer approach where you're basically stacking up modifications on top of each other that are not affecting one another. So that way you can kind of work through Lightroom in the same kind of layer format. Now starting with the base adjustments, these are all adjustments that we're going to make to get our images to pop, to get them to look nice and color corrected. And what these are going to be affecting is primarily the basic panel adjustments that you see here, with 2 minor exceptions which we'll go over in a minute. Next we have curves, and we have 4 different curves folders that are going to apply different effects using the tone curve panel right here. So they're not going to affect any of the basic adjustments that we make above. Each of these curves folders is grouped based on a color schema. So neutral curves are basically curves that do not add any additional colors to the image. Cool curves are going to apply cool tone settings, and we have 3 different cool tones. We have teal, which is green, we have azure, which is blue, we have violet, which is obviously purple, and then we have a cool cross processing, which makes up the 4th, and that's basically a cross process look with overall cool tones. So those are the 4 colors within the cool curves. Inside of the warm curves, we have amber, which is yellow, apricot, which is orange, crimson, which is red, and then warm cross processing, which is cross processing with a warm hue. Inside of the antique curves, we have our black and white and duotone settings, starting with black and white, then with amber, which is going to be basically kind of that sepia yellow toned black and white look, bronze duotoning look, where you have kind of the browns and reds mixed in, and then the azure look, where you have blues inside of your black and white. And lastly, we have the special effects folder, which are additional settings that you guys are going to use to adjust vignetting, kind of create artistic vignettes and different kind of edge effects, add grain, as well as you can add lens softening to kind of create old school lens effects and stuff like that. Alright, so let's close this and open up the neutral curves panel, and let's go through and talk about how the curves are organized because it's actually the same for all of the curves folders. Now at the top of each curves folder we have a reset button which is going to reset the curve back to this standard look, which is what you see here. So if I click it right now, it's not actually going to do anything because we haven't actually applied any additional curves yet. Now you'll notice below we have 4 different effect groupings. We have bright washes, neutral punches, and dark washes. Now starting from the top, a bright wash is going to brighten and wash out the image. So it's going to wash out the contrast and brighten the exposure. A neutral wash is going to keep the exposure the same while it washes out the contrast. A neutral punch is going to keep the exposure the same, but it's going to punch up the overall contrast in the image. And then we have a dark wash which is going to darken and wash out the contrast in the image. Now in each one of these groupings we have 4 different colors and each one is named based on how it affects the color. So within the neutral curves we're not adding any extra color, we're just modifying the color that was originally with the image. With an ivory bright wash we see that it's going to brighten and wash out the image, and the ivory tone keeps the colors just how they are intact. Reverse saturate is basically going to pull down some of the colors while brightening only the bright colors. So you get a bright wash with reverse saturation. Desaturate is going to desaturate and create a bright wash look to the image. And then we have desaturated cross, which is going to desaturate, cross process, and then apply the bright wash setting. And this system is the exact same for the neutral washes, neutral punches, and so on. So by understanding this, we know that an ivory neutral wash is going to not affect any color tones. It's going to not affect the exposure, but wash out the image. So when I apply it, you see it does exactly that. Reverse saturate is going to tone down the overall saturation and then only boost saturation in the brighter colors, which we see when we apply it. Desaturate, again, creates a desaturated look, and desaturated cross creates that desaturated cross process look with the neutral wash. Exact same thing when it gets to neutral punches again. Again, we're applying ivory. That doesn't do anything to the colors. We just punch up the overall contrast. Now, if you have a contrasty image to begin with, which is what we had a second ago, then this could be too powerful an effect by adding, you're basically adding contrast on top of contrast, just as a heads up. But again, these do the exact same thing, and then going down to dark washes, these are going to darken the image, and then we know that ivory is going to keep the saturation colors the same. Reverse saturate reverses, and then only brightens the saturation in those kind of more powerful colors. Desaturate is going to overall pull down saturation, and desaturate cross. Now, one of the effects that I love is I like to apply these dark washes to images and then brighten it up with base adjustments to the exposure. And this creates kind of a really cool faded effect where you have really muted tones in like the blacks and the highlights. So I'm going to adjust exposure back to 0. Let's go to our curves, and I'm going to reset the neutral curve. And this takes us back to the setting that we had right a second ago with the standard color corrected version. Now again, this organizational system for these curves is the same throughout all of them. So with cool curves, we have the exact same thing with bright washes first on top, and then we have different color effects. Now basically with the different color schema, we know that cool curves is applying cool tone colors to these curves. So if I apply a teal bright wash, it's going to brighten and wash out the image while applying kind of green teal color toning to the image. Azure is going to apply blues, violet is going to be purples, and so on and so forth down through the neutral washes and through neutral punches and dark washes, etc. Same thing with the warm curves. These are all going to be warming tones. So amber, yellow, apricot, orange, crimson, red, and again, you have the same groupings. All right, so I'm going to reset this out. Now, the cool part about this system is that knowing the names of each of these presets and knowing how it all functions, it's going to be super easy to get the effect that you want. When I look at this image, I go, okay, I think this image would look really cool with just kind of a nice warm cross-process look and kind of faded contrast. Well, automatically I know I'm going to open up my warm curves. I'm going to go down to my neutral washes and apply warm cross-processing to it. And I get this cool looking image, and I know the effect before I apply the setting. Now I can leave this image the way it is, or I can say I'm going to apply some special effects to it. I'm going to go down to my special effects, and what I'd like to do is basically pull in a slide burn. So I'm going to burn the edges to be kind of like that slide film look. I want to add some grain, and then let's create some edge softening to kind of blur the edges down a bit. And then what we're going to do is go back up, and we're going to add another vignetting layer down here in the base adjustments. So I'm going to pull in a heavy vignette just to kind of darken. Actually, let's go up to medium. And that creates kind of this really cool toy camera effect that we get from our image. Now at any point in time, I can go back and choose another curve. Let's say I want a curve that has some different colors to it. And maybe I want to go with like just a standard desaturated cross-process look rather than going with a warm look. Maybe I want to go with a washed out desaturated cross without kind of the brightening and stuff like that. Maybe I want to go with a dark wash and then apply some brightening to it to get it up and boost it. So I'm going to apply that and go in and apply a lightening effect to bring up the exposure. Whatever effect you guys want to create, it's super easy to navigate to it. So now let's briefly review the workflow and kind of which presets affect what area. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-R or Command-Shift-R on a Mac to fully reset everything. We're going to go back to the standard import where we had it when we first brought it into Lightroom. Now the base adjustments are designed to be worked through basically from top to bottom. So you'll see at the top we have our exposure adjustments, dynamic range, detail, contrast, noise reduction, and then vignetting. Now noise reduction and vignetting are the only non-basic panel adjustments that we're making. Like we mentioned earlier, with the exception of those two, Everything other than those two adjustments are all basic panel adjustments. These are all adjustments that we consider things that basically every image needs. We need to adjust noise and vignetting and contrast, all that kind of stuff in every single image. So these we consider all of our basic adjustments. So once we finish the basic adjustments and get the image to a nice kind of standard color corrected look, then we're going to go down and basically choose additional curves if we want to go for different effects. So we know that the curves are grouped by color schema, and now we just select the color schema and the effect that we want to get. And then we can decide from there if we want to go into special effects, and we can add additional lens effects, grain, and whatever to mimic film or toy camera or whatever we want. Now, while for most images it's not really necessary, I do like to have my right side panel open for two reasons. We didn't create temperature and tint presets, and the reason why is that there's already presets over here in this menu, and also to create these presets, it's going to just make just a ton more kind of presets that you guys have to select from, and it really bogs down this left side menu. So it's really easier, if you guys don't shoot correct in the camera, just to go over and dial in the temperature and tint that you guys need for that specific image over here on the right side. The only other adjustments you're going to be making here is when you need to make tiny modifications, like when we need to take exposure down just by a little bit, or contrast just down by like 2 or 3 minor modifications of the image you want to still do in your right side panel. Alright guys, so that's it for this basic primer on the develop presets and how the system works. Let's move on and talk a little about the brush presets.